Exploring the bizarre. Your e-ticket ride into the world of the paranormal. Strap yourself in as we traverse the universe exploring the unexplained. UFOs, ghosts, lost worlds, cryptozoology, as well as other dimensions. It's time to take back the night. Now, your electrifying hosts of Exploring the Bizarre, Timothy Beckley and Tim Swartz.
Take me out to the ball game. Take me out to the crowd. Buy me some peanuts and Cracker Jack. I don't care if I ever get back. Just be rude. Oh, hell. Go, Yankees. Go. Go.
Hey, I can see that you're really excited about the Bronx Bombers being in first place. But, hey, let's not forget about our Cleveland Indians here. We have a good club. You know, hey, we took 2 out of 3 with you guys last weekend.
Yeah, sure. When was the last time you won a pennant, though? It's the Yankees. It's the only team that counts, the Bronx Bombers.
Man, that doesn't sound like good sportsmanship, Tim. You know, I always thought of you as a team player, you know, for the good of us all.
Talk later. It's my turn to bat. Where's the rosin bag? Time to get up and hit a home run for Tina and our Exploring the Bizarre listeners.
But, Tim, not on the Yankees. You're just a fan.
That's what you think. Here we are. We're making history. We're making history tonight. Of course, Rick Hilberg and I have made history for many, many years. In fact, I'm going to have a fabulous time this evening. I mean, we always enjoy our guests, but in particular, our guest tonight has been a friend of mine since, well, we met probably, Rick, wouldn't you say, in the pages of Ray Palmer's Flying Saucers magazine.
Yeah, it was at Ray Palmer's Flying Saucers magazine. They had like a club news section. And
That's right.
It was a free thing. It was a free thing. You could advertise your club and stuff.
Yeah, what do you get free anymore, right?
No,
you know,
nothing.
What the heck? Nothing is free anymore now. But yeah, we all started meeting and greeting and corresponding with each other and sending tapes around and spreading the word of ufology and putting out newsletters. That's what we did best. You and I were both grinding out some of the best publications in town. But Rick, I'm gonna take you back to the beginning. I'm gonna let you tell our listeners give them your background in this. Now, I didn't realize until I was going over your bio today that you attended your first UFO meeting in 1958. You must have been 10 years old.
No, actually, I was, I was like 11 years old.
11? Well, hey, my mistake. My mistake.
Just a young kid. Same as you, man. You know, you've been interested a long time.
I think I didn't attend my first UFO meeting. Well, I don't remember what year it was, but it was a double header. For 50 or 75 cents, I got to see Gray Barker and Ivan T. Sanderson. Jim Moseley was having, I think weekly or biweekly meetings in Manhattan, and I lived over in New Jersey. And I was too young to go myself, but my sister's husband took me over on the suburban bus, and the room was so packed that they had to split the meeting into 2 different rooms. In those days, Ricky, you could rent a room for like $20 or $25. Today, as you know, they charge you like $1,000 just to have 12 seats in a room, just about. And I was mesmerized. I had heard these guys on the Long John Nebel show. I was being late going to school because I was sitting there at my transistor radio, courtesy of the Roswell aliens, no doubt. And you're sitting there and in bed with the blanket pulled up so that nobody else could hear the radio, and listening to Long John Nebel interview some of the most fascinating people, I was going to say, on the face of the earth, but he probably had them coming in from somewhere else as well. So I attended the meetings and got hooked up with Jim and started my own newsletter. What was your first publication?
My first thing was actually, it was a local Cleveland group. It was called UFO Newsletter, a bunch of us kids. And we were basically all in junior high school then. And we went and bought I bought a spirit duplicator, one of the little ditto machines, except this one wasn't
nobody
you could,
knows what that is anymore. I don't think. Yeah.
no, the little
It
purple
printed
print
purple,
that smelled of
ink.
alcohol. Yeah.
Well, yeah. When we got older, we started drinking it, no doubt. But hey, it had printed purple. It printed
Yeah.
in purple. Well, it's not even ink. It was not even
No,
toner.
no.
And it evaporated
Yeah.
after what 6 or 7 months or something like that. Although you did find recently a copy of the first saucer book that I ever did, which we managed to reprint. Inside the Saucers 1962. You were
Right.
the only person that I know of that had a copy in their files, and you shared it with me. And it's now available on Amazon, along with 307 other books. Okay, so you started this little club, but Cleveland was always the ufological hotspot. I mean, there
Yeah.
were, I don't know, several UFO groups in Cleveland, and I used to have an antenna on the roof. I had not a ham radio set, but you could pull in the stations from far, far away, and with the crackling of the AM dial, I would listen to. It was the Cleveland Ufology Roundtable with Earl Neff.
Yes.
In fact,
Yes.
yeah, I recently found an old show on the somewhere on the internet that had been remastered, and it was I think 65 or 1966, and Earl read a postcard from Tim Beckley of the Interplanetary News Service.
Oh my gosh.
So there you go. But tell us about a little bit about the ufology there in Cleveland, because that goes back before the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Certainly, it
Oh,
was
way
the
before.
ufological Hall of Fame to some degree. Give us a little rundown on the history there of Cleveland
Well,
ufology.
for some reason or other, right from the get-go, Cleveland was a hotbed for UFO activity, not only sightings, but people that were interested in the subject. And there were several groups in Cleveland at one time, back in the 50s and 60s. There was the Cleveland Ufology Project, which Earl Neff was a part of. He was the first chairman, I believe, and that was formed in like 1956. And I was a member there in the 60s. Then there was the Cleveland UFO Society, which was headed by a really kind man. You probably remember him, Larry Blasey, Lawrence Blasey.
Oh
And
yeah, my goodness.
yeah, yeah. And they
Now was he the artist?
Yeah, he was an artist. So was Earl. Earl was an artist too. Earl was like a commercial artist. Larry was, oh God, he was a fine artist. Some of his stuff hangs in museums all around the country. But Larry's group was a little bit more oriented towards the more esoteric, angles, contacteeism and such. Where Cleveland Ufology Project was basically a nuts and bolts group affiliated with NICAP, like some of the other groups around the back. Now we had groups in Akron. There were several active UFO groups in Akron back in the late 50s and early 60s. The Flying Saucer Investigating Committee was headed by a guy named A.E. Conduso, and his sidekick was a really kind guy named Larry Moyers, really good investigators. And there were smaller groups that like in Lima and Findlay, all concentrated in the northern Ohio area. And you had a small group of people.
Yeah, am I wrong in saying that the Goodyear had a UFO group?
That was a group that started in the 1960s, the Goodyear UFO Society, and it was a corporately sponsored group. Goodyear Tire and Rubber Company, which was headquartered in Akron, they had the world headquarters, great big back then. The business was really booming, and they sponsored corporate clubs. There was clubs on knitting, probably bowling, and this and that.
Yeah.
And there were enough people interested in UFOs. They actually sponsored and paid for a corporate UFO club, and they even paid for them to put out a small newsletter.
Ah, boy, that would be a collector's item. What a memory I have, though, right? I mean, who could ever remember that Goodyear had a UFO group? I
Yeah,
can't find I can't find my keys or the orders that people sent in yesterday, but I can remember the UFO group there. And the newsletters. Well, your newsletter now. There was Al Manick and
Yeah.
Ron.
Well, actually, no. We
Ron.
started. No, we
Yeah.
were separate. We were separate, Tim, for
Yeah.
a long, long time.
Mm-hmm.
I had my after the UFO newsletter. I started in '62. My own UFO magazine. It was still done in the same Spirit duplicator machine because I bought the original one for the other club, little group of guys, and I did that. And it eventually evolved into a printed publication. Probably about 1964, it started to be offset printed. Now in 1966, late 1966. Al Manick, the late Al Manick, and Ron Pelger, who was another good artist, they decided that they wanted to do their own magazine. They started Flying Saucer Digest. And for many years, we were friendly competitors. And Al finally talked me into folding my UFO magazine into Flying Saucer Digest in 1970. So I did at that time. It was a tough decision, but it was one that it made sense. And then we all three worked together, and we had a larger mailing list, and we pulled our heads together, and we put FSD was a rather doggone good publication for many years.
Well, no, you just recently gave up putting it out. You had to continue it up until the very, you were the last English magazine printed publication in English anywhere, as far as I know, in the world, not including the 14 Times, which I don't consider a UFO magazine. The last one to go before you was the Australian Ufologist.
Okay.
Which was a very, very good magazine. We contributed to that for quite a number of years, and then all of a sudden, boom, it was gone. But of course, in the 60s and the 70s, there was a proliferation of publications on the subject.
Even here in Cleveland, too.
Yeah.
In Cleveland, we had several zines.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. But not
UFO,
only just...
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
Go ahead. We had the UFO Spotter. And that's probably a really obscure one that was done by a young man in Parma Heights, Ohio, which was one of the Cleveland bedroom suburbs, and it was sort of based on FSD, but it actually was around for 2 or 3 years. Then there were several other smaller publications. There's still
Gateway.
The Gate.
Wasn't Gateway?
The Gate is still going. Yeah, the Gate. Yeah, that started in the late '70s, I believe. Beth Robbins is the editor, and she's still around, and it's sort of a 14 zine.
Yeah. Now, did the UFON, did they get started? Did they have a publication that was running out of Ohio at one point?
Well, the MUFON of Ohio, I'm the historian for it. I was the treasurer for a number of years, and we're still going. We started a newsletter, and probably in the late '90s, and we're still going today. Phyllis Budinger, who's a very an analytical scientist, and who did a lot of work on Betty Hill's dress, as a matter of fact, chemical analysis, and she's done a number of similar cases. She is the editor, and I contribute a retrospective little tidbits in each and every issue. But we've had a publication for a number of years, and I ended FSD last fall. I was ill, and my wife Carol, who has been the partner in crime and the secret editor of Flying Saucer Digest since 1990. She got breast cancer, and which she's doing fine now. But it was just you have to hit your priorities. You can't you can't put out a zine and put up with the rigors of chemo and all that other stuff and all the stress. And it was just time to end the run. We had a good run.
Yeah. But you are still active on Facebook. I know I correspond with you there, and you post some of the material from yesteryears there, and I think also too one of the landmark things about Cleveland. It was the original host to the Congress of Scientific UFOlogists. Am I correct?
That's right.
Yeah.
1964 was our first year, and that was quite an undertaking. I mean, a number of people decided, there are contactee conventions all around the country. You had Giant Rock, and you had Buck Nelson's thing, and you had, Strangest was holding conventions, and, so on and so forth. And we decided it was time for a serious gathering, a serious conclave of researchers to get together and try to pool our resources and share our information and cooperate with each other. And that's what started. By the way, I still am. Our old friend Brent Raines. He had Alternate Perceptions. He's still running it. He had
still
it as a print publication for a number of years. And in 2000 or 2001, he went online, which is the trend with everything. And I've been doing a number of articles for Brent lately, too. So you can find my stuff in Alternate Perceptions.
Now, okay, but getting back to the Congresses, was that the original name? I'm a little bit confused myself.
Yes,
And I'm on the board of directors, and I can't remember.
The infamous Permanent Organizing Committee.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, it was a Congress of Scientific.
How many of the people are still alive that are on the board there?
Well, there's you and I and Greenfield.
That's right.
Yeah, where do we go from there? Not too many. Not too many. Jim Gray and we forgot David Halpern. David Halpern was around.
That's correct.
Too. So so we and Gene Steinberg.
How could we?
He was around.
Gene?
How could we forget Gene?
We might like to, but we haven't. Kidding, Gene. Kidding.
Yeah, it's a rivalry thing. A good natured radio rivalry.
Yes, I don't want to say anything too bad because then they won't have a tribute show when I
go. When you finally shake off the mortal coil, they'll just totally ignore you.
There you go. Hey, okay, so how many? Well, Jim had the biggest UFO indoor conference of all time, 1967 at the Commodore Hotel, which is now one of President Trump's place, or was for a while there, or something. And he had a great turnout. I had 10 or 12,000 people, and I got to introduce I think Vi Venus, lady who claimed she was from another planet, and
Long John brought her. Long John.
Well, Long John had the Midas touch. If he went on the air the night before and said that he was going to come down, which he seldom did, the place would be packed. And he had a guest. He had the week before the conference. He had a guest on every night who was going to speak there. And Jim had Howard Menger, who hadn't spoken in many years. Frank Strangers. And that's the first conference that I met my good friend Brad Steiger. Brad had just come out with his first book, Strangers from the Sky, I think it was called.
Yes, that was Strangers in the Sky. Yeah. 66.
And he was there. He was there. Now, okay, so what happened to the group? I mean, it was active up until 10 years ago?
Just about 10 years ago, I guess, or no, a little more than 10 years ago. Let's put it that way. Yeah, I don't know.
We did meet recently, about 4 or 5 years ago. We had
a reunion in 2015. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And
we had fun.
We traveled around the country with that. I mean, it was a traveling show. I mean, I put it on one time in Phoenix.
Yes, I was there. Yeah, that was a great one.
One time in Miami. Did you come to that?
Yes, I was in Miami Beach. Yes. Oh, yeah, I've been to a lot of them. Yeah, we were all over the country: San Francisco, New York, Atlanta, Miami Beach, all over the country, man. Every place conceivable. Logansport, Indiana, Columbus, Ohio. How much corn-fed Midwestern can you get to that?
King of Prussia, Pennsylvania.
Yes. I forgot about that one. Yeah, we've been all over the place. But as to what happened, I think it was just competition from MUFON. MUFON became the dominant organization. It was kind of like the thing with NICAP. They were more of a membership oriented group, and they put out a regular publication. And we didn't. We were just a gathering of interested people, basically heads of UFO groups, publications, or the movers and shakers. And we tried to get together and exchange information as best we could, and kept in touch. And we got a lot of work done, on the periphery of things. The after session meetings, we would get together and we'd make deals and write articles and share information. That was the fun part of it. But yeah, MUFON was a more public, open membership publication, and they gradually took over.
Well, there were even minutes. If you remember, the secretary for many years was John J. Robinson.
John J. Robinson.
That's correct. And put all the UFO sightings and stuff on punch cards. That was
Project Grayfile. Project Grayfile. And
I don't think that ever
was. It never went anywhere. No.
Well, no, because what could you do with it? I mean, really, when you think about it, well, you knew he had a couple of thousand sightings there, but what does that tell you? Because you can't separate the real UFOs from the fake UFOs and the hallucinations and the planet Venus, and also you end up with just nothing really. And no, I mean, John Keel told us more when he said that the height of UFO sightings was every Wednesday night between 9 and 10 o'clock.
Yes, Wednesday nights. I remember that. The infamous Wednesday night cycle. But anyway, we tried. There was a fellow named Cohen. I can't think of his first name, but he was a computer programmer, and he showed up at one of the meetings, and people. This was in like 1965. Computers were. What the heck's a computer? What do you? Well, it's a magic thing. You feed it information, and it tells you everything you want to know. Well, it's garbage in, garbage out. Well, we didn't know that, so we.
Primitive. Yeah. Oh, absolutely primitive. Yeah.
It was. But we worked. Ed Beeble, who's still around. He's one of the.
Correct.
Yeah, he out in Arizona, and he kind of took charge of Grayfile for a while there, and we would end up at meetings, and we would be filling out these little information cards, and stuff like that, and not having fun drinking and carousing. We were working on this stuff, but we did it, and we collected all the stuff.
We did a little bit of drinking and carousing. Come on.
Well, only after we got so many cards done, Tim. You had to get our quote in.
Well, Jim Mosley and I were down at the bar while you guys were punching cards. I
resent that. You guys had all the fun. Mom always liked you best anyway,
Well, we're coming up on our break, and when we come back, I want to hit you up on some of the things you know best, mainly about the UFO activity in Ohio, past, present, and future, because you're the man with the how many file cabinets you got there at home? Well, we'll come back after the break. After the break. All right, we'll be back in just a couple of minutes.
Okay.
Stay tuned.
Now back to exploring the bizarre with two of the most electrifying researchers in the paranormal. Your hosts, Timothy Beckley and Tim Swartz.
And we have this evening Ohio's main man ufologist, Rick HILBERG. And Rick, we forgot to mention that you were also a publisher of the Book of Weirdology.
Yeah, we had a little booklet, the Book of Weirdology, and we had a Weirdology newsletter that went on.
That's
for
what I thought. Yeah.
That was folded into FSD about 10 years ago. So it was just too much to do two different publications. Yeah. But now, we had our own 14 thing.
Yeah, CUPS, Cleveland Ufology Project. They are
Hmm.
still active, correct? They still have
Yes, they
meetings.
are. As a matter of fact, they have a meeting coming up, I believe, this Saturday night, and they
Uh,
meet at a local community college in a western suburb of Cleveland. They're still going
uh,
pretty strong. They've got quite a few members. Yeah, they're still
do they
around since 1956.
do they have guest speakers and all?
Yes, they will get guest speakers. Not too from too far away, though. I don't
Yeah,
believe some Ohio people and some of their members make presentations, but
yeah.
on occasion they have had some people who may be in town at the time, and
Mm.
I haven't been to any of the meetings. I don't drive at night anymore because of some eye issues from an accident about 10 years ago. But
Uh,
I understand that they have some rather lively meetings and some rather good ones.
not as good as ours, I'm sure.
Oh
But
no,
what the?
we were
Well,
best.
all right. But hey, let's get into. We've talked about the key figures in Ohio ufology,
Hmm.
but let's talk about what has made Ohio famous. Mainly the many sightings that have taken place there over the years. In fact, at one point, Rick, wasn't Ohio right up there as one of the states with the most UFO reports?
I believe at one time it was like number three for many
Hmm.
years, and I believe this was back in the 1960s, and maybe even later on than that. But yeah, it always has been, and it still is. I mean, I have a friend in Pennsylvania who keeps track on UFO sightings, and he sends regular printouts, and there are a good number of cases that come from various parts of Ohio. So yeah, it's still active. Probably because of the interest that's been in the state all over, from the north to the south. Um, I guess that the folks that were interested in the subject heard about these cases and therefore were able to publicize them in their various newsletters and meetings, and
Yes.
so they've entered the public record.
Uh, Now, take us back as many years as you can. What was the first important UFO sighting in Ohio that you can recall?
Well, the first really important UFO sighting in Ohio, to my mind, was the Norwood, Ohio searchlight case. And this occurred
Hmm.
back in 1954, and it was investigated by another famous uh,
Yes,
Len Stringfield of Cincinnati.
that's correct.
Now, Norwood
Yes.
is a nearby suburb of Cincinnati. Matter of fact, we even had a convention in Cincinnati back in I think it was the 70s or something. So we've been all over the place. Another city I forgot about. Anyway, yeah, Norwood it was a really close-in suburb of Cincinnati, and at a particular Catholic church, they were having a carnival. And this was in August of 1954. And they had, as was, the custom in those days, they had a large war surplus searchlight that they would rent, and the operator would come out and sweep the sky with these beams.
Yes.
And back
Mhm.
then, people would flock. What's that? It must, something's going on. It must be some sort of fun or whatever. And they'd flock to and there was the carnival roaring away, and they got a few dollars for their church. Well, the searchlight operator and a number of other witnesses, including the priest, who was a fellow named Reverend Gregory Miller. Um, they happened to notice that there was some sort of a disc-like object that would occasionally show up in the searchlight beam. And these were clear evenings. There were no clouds, whatever. And this thing was there for several nights running. And they uh, the disc-shaped object or whatever. Well, I'm trying to remember. It emitted a couple groups of satellite objects, like triangular objects that would shoot out of
Mm.
it, which is a common thing in a lot of sightings. And in one evening, there was a former Army searchlight operator, and I looked his name up. His name is Don Berger, and they were able to take a couple rolls of movie film
Yeah.
and with a
Oh, movie
telephoto
film. I
lens.
didn't know. I've seen
Yeah,
the still photo, but I
there's a
didn't
still
realize that.
photograph. Yes, there are still
Yeah.
photographs that were taken
Yeah.
with an old speed graphic press camera. through another, and that was equipped with a telephoto lens. It's a good case. Here you had a multiple witness case, because when they were seeing this thing in the searchlight beam, some of the onlookers came and they saw it too, not just the priest or the searchlight operator, but on occasion, I guess it was a high of maybe 15 or 20 people at any one time were actually watching this thing. And you had the movie film and the still pictures.
Okay, one of the weird things about it, if I remember correctly, is that the object somehow miraculously pulled the searchlight beam outside of a straight line.
That may be the case. I don't remember it about that particular case. But I'd have to.
Look at the photograph. The object is a little bit off to the left, if I remember correctly, and the beam is following it.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
Well, I don't remember that aspect of the case. And I know that was written up in Stringfield's book. It was called Inside Saucer Post 30 Blue. So,
Blue, something like that, yes.
Yeah.
And now, didn't he have, Len Stringfield, of course, who is probably best known for his cataloging and, I was going to say
crashes.
Documenting with
UFO crash retrievals.
That's correct. But he had a hotline to the military. He was considered such a I guess a credible researcher that there was even somewhat of a sharing of information between him and the military-industrial complex.
Yes, it was more of a one-way thing, though, is my understanding. I mean, he went through. He had a hotline to some filter center or whatever, and he would call in these reports, and I don't think he got too much information back, but he was, feeding it into them, doing his duty. He was a former Army Air Corps. He worked, he was a bomber, not a pilot, but I think he was a gunner or something on some B-17s that saw some pretty heavy action during World War II. Yeah, so, but he had a hotline also where people could call in from the general public, like we did here in Cleveland for several, for many, many years. I even had one calling into my house for back in the 80s, 70s, and 80s. So I got a lot of different reports, and so did Al Manick back in the 60s. But yeah, we've got a lot of good cases.
Speaking of Al Manick and World War II, Al Manick had a sighting of a Foo Fighter when he was in the military.
He was in the Air Force, and it was over in Tripoli. And he and his crew were making tow targets. And they saw some sort of a strange object, a ball-like object that was maneuvering around in the clear sky. And he called an officer over.
Nazi UFO.
Yeah, it was a Nazi UFO, obviously. Yeah, it had the little swastikas on it and everything, I suppose.
I'm sure.
But anyway, he called an officer over. And he said, "Sir, look at that. What do you make of that, sir?" And the officer just kind of looked up and said, "Airman, I don't see anything at all. Why don't you get back to building your tow target here?" So that was that.
Well, Al, he had the finest sense of humor.
Oh yeah.
he could make you roll on the floor. I mean, he was
sometimes unintentionally.
Maybe so. Now, what would you consider to be like the top 2 or 3 cases in Ohio over the years?
Okay, well, you have to go back to 1957. That was the Olden Moore case, and this was in November of that year. And Moore was a plasterer by trade. He was getting back to his home in Huntsburg, which is a far eastern suburb. He saw some sort of a bright star-like thing approaching him, and it seemed to be following the course of the road, which was a state highway. As the light got brighter and brighter, he pulled to the side of the road to watch it, and he switched off his ignition. And in a matter of seconds, he said, It was over a large field at an intersection there of Hart Road, I think, and Route 86, if I'm not mistaken. And it was still high in the air, but it seemed to split apart, and one section of it moved out of his range of vision. The other descended slowly with no noise or anything into that adjoining field. And it looked like it was as big as a house looming, right in front of him.
Mm.
And he couldn't tell if it was resting on the ground or not. He said it was about 50 feet across, maybe 20 feet from top to bottom. It was a classic round, round saucer, like two saucers placed on one another. The classic thing, and it had a sort of a dome, a cone-shaped dome in the center of the top. He watched it for about 15 minutes, and he, got out to get a closer look, but he had this, eerie, sort of weird feeling about it. He didn't want to approach it any closer, so he actually didn't. But he could see the object sort of clearly because it was a bright moon that night, and it was a clear night, and he thought it to be like a shiny metallic thing. And eventually it took off, and he ran home and drove home and called authorities about it, civil defense and the local sheriff, and they came out, and the civil defense director for Lake County, which was where the sighting occurred, actually he couldn't make it out that night, but he came out the next day, and they saw some small markings about an inch or an inch and a half deep into the soil. And they consisted of like 3 holes in a triangular pattern with a 4th hole outside of the thing, kind of like the Socorro landing, if you really think about it. And there was some plaster cast made over this, and the civil defense director took a Geiger counter reading about 20 hours after the thing, and an area about 50 feet in diameter showed a higher reading than the background, and it was well above normal. And, so there was a little bit of evidence, a little physical evidence and evidence as far as the Geiger count reading. So it was a credible sighting. The really strange part of the sighting occurs later when the Air Force calls Moore and asks him if he would like to come to Washington, D.C. to discuss his case. And he was kind of taken aback by it. He said, sure. And whoever it was, a lieutenant or whatever, said, well, okay, pack a bag and I'll pick you up. And the Air Force man in an Air Force car came, took him to an Air Force base in Youngstown and flew him to Washington, D.C., or so Moore claims. And there he was ensconced in a room, not in the Pentagon, but in an office building somewhere in D.C. His meals were taken there. They wouldn't allow him to go out. And they grilled him at length about the sighting. And he was returned the next day via plane and driven to his house.
Did he get to meet Val Thor?
No, he didn't. But here you have this sinister thing, that so many people used to, back in the day, claim the Air Force knows everything, and
That's
look
correct.
what they're doing. The silence group within the Air Force is out to get us and suppress knowledge of UFOs, So that was another big case. Now, you want to hear the topper of the whole thing, and this involves a good friend, Al Manick, and even me. This was when, in the 1960s, from like 1963 to 1966, Al Manick, under the auspices of the Cleveland Ufology Project, and he was the chairman for 63 and 64, and I was an officer too, a membership secretary. We had the hotline that called right into Al's house, and one night, the night of October 9th, 1965. The phone began to ring, about 9 o'clock at night. And it turned out that there was a witness near the downtown Cleveland area, just west of downtown Cleveland, on Vega Avenue, if anybody out there is familiar with Cleveland, near Clark Avenue in Vega. And they reported a sort of a disc-shaped object in the sky with lights on its perimeter, flashing a sequential pattern. And this thing was heading towards the west. But to make a long story short, that night, Al received a total of 92 phone calls.
92?
Reported 92 phone calls.
Wow.
He could not get off the phone to call people to alert them. He finally got off the phone and alerted me. And here's where I come in later in the story. This thing was seen by multiple witnesses. I still have some of the report forms that he mailed out and they mailed back. One of them is so very striking. It shows witnesses who were literally underneath this object and drew a picture of it with the lights around the perimeter. So here you're not talking about an aircraft, you're talking about a disc-shaped object. And the night weather conditions that night there was a 2,200-foot cloud ceiling, and there was a light drizzle. Okay, so whatever it was below 2,200 feet to be that clear and visible. So it eventually moved towards the western suburbs. The people were all saying the same thing. It's a disc. It's got lights flashing in a sequential pattern, and a clockwise pattern on this thing. Okay? Now, the people who got directly underneath it could see, a lot of people say, oh, that's an advertising plane, because believe it or not, there were advertising planes that we used to get calls on back in the 60s when that was a big thing. And they would have advertising on the wing of the plane. You know, it would be like
Goodyear, Goodyear blimp advertising their UFO club, no doubt. Yes.
Except one in '66, we had one that came in. It was from Plymouth Automobile Dealers. Plymouth is out to win you over. Was flashing on the wing of the plane. Finally, we figured that out. But this night, it was not an advertising plane. Anyway, Al finally got through to me. He said, "Damn, Rick, I saw this thing. Go outside and look up toward blah blah blah. It's headed your way." So I went out in my backyard, and here's the damn thing to the north of me, and it's heading towards the west, and it did. I saw it from some distance. I could not tell the shape, but I could see that it was moving slowly to the west, and it did have this sequential lights flashing and a clockwise pattern. So I immediately got on the CB radio. CB radio was hot back then. That was a Facebook of its day, you know?
Yeah, yes.
And other operators got on, and I ran in the house because, you know, I got to report this thing. I watched it for probably 2 minutes and got on, and we had a particular channel we used to hang around, Channel 19, which later turned out to be the big call channel or whatever for the truckers. But we all, people were calling, and they went out and saw it too. And this object moved about as far to the west of Cleveland as the suburb of Fairview Park, where the thing was lost to sight. Whatever happened, it was lost there. But it probably traversed 4 or 5 miles of the heart of the city, the west side of the city, over a period of probably 25 to 30 minutes. And here you had all these witnesses seeing the thing, and it was kind of, it was an ironclad case. I mean, I saw it, and there were people who were underneath it that could see it, and people who could see it at a closer angle that say, no, it's not an aircraft. It's not the blimp. You know, it's not anything. And just to make sure, Manic did call. There were 2 services, one out of Cleveland, one out of Akron, that actually had advertising planes, you know, advertising services. Yeah. They had nothing up in the air that night, so it was not an advertising plane. So this was up until, you know, you had like the Phoenix lights. This was a really well-witnessed mass UFO sighting over a major city.
Did it make the press at all?
Barely. We people were calling actually into the newspapers and some of the radio stations, and they were referring people to Al. So he got some of his calls through that. That's how he got some of the calls.
I can imagine how he must have felt by the time he got like a call number 60 or something, you know.
Oh, he was frazzled that night. Yeah, he was literally frazzled that night. He said, I mean, it took everything out of him, but he was meticulous in getting the people's names and addresses and made sure that every one of those callers received a report form. Obviously, not everyone mailed it back. Yeah. But
of course,
a number did. A good enough number did that we were able to get some good information out of it and prove that it was a really good case. So here you go.
You know, Rick, we're headed towards the. I was going to say midnight hour, but it's not the midnight unless you're in Barbados or something like that, I
Yeah.
suppose.
Nova
I do
Scotia.
want to have you back. Yeah, I do want to have you back on maybe after Memorial Day because we didn't get to talk about trains because
No,
that's a subject. No, we never got to the choo-choo
no
part of the
choo-choos.
show. No choo-choos.
And I've got
But
more weird sightings for you too, Tim. I've got some
oh,
really weird stuff.
we will continue this, and I'll probably be in Cleveland to be inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame.
We're holding your
And
we're holding your spot.
I'm very disappointed when I went out there. Now I'm an old time rock and roller, promoted shows, knew David Bowie and all of that. I was surprised that the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame closes so early.
Really, I didn't know what time's it close. 9 o'clock or
Well, I
something like
don't I
that.
don't remember, but it closes early. Well, rock and rollers never go out before midnight.
No, well, maybe it's some sort of a corporate thing. Who knows?
I don't know. Well, there you go. But uh, when's the last sighting there in Cleveland that you're aware of? What's the last report?
There was something in, I believe, in March here, and it was kind of a lighted object that was seen out over Lake Erie. Just sort of an average sort of
Yeah.
case.
Well,
But
Lake Erie, they've been landing. We've got photos of them landing on Lake Erie. I mean, it's
yeah,
very
that a lot of
eerie
people claim.
what's
Yeah,
going on in
people
Lake
claim that.
Erie. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
yeah.
Erie, huh? And we have a Lake Erie monster too.
Well, any
We have
other?
our own
Well,
monster.
we never got to talk about humanoids either. In fact,
No,
I know there've been a lot of sightings of creatures, and we investigated one case where this object, maybe it was a UFO crash or semi UFO crash, where this big chunk of something or other it fell from the sky near a shopping mall. That's in my Hangar 18 book, which is now UFO Crashes and Legends, I believe. Anyway, Rick, you're a fabulous guest. You've been a friend all these years. We'll do
oh,
it again, Sam, and let's have another meeting.
yeah,
And
right.
check out the Rick on Facebook,
Facebook,
Hilberg,
yeah, at
HILBERG.
That's right. You'll find me.
There you go. And don't forget our YouTube channel, Mr. UFO Secret Files. Over 400 interviews. It'll blow your mind. Good night, one and all. Good night, Tina. Good night, Peter. Good night, Helen. Good night, Carol. Good night, the universe.
You've been listening to Exploring the Bizarre with hosts Timothy Beckley and Tim Swartz. They're taking back the night by jetting non-stop across the cosmos in search of the truly bizarre and totally unexplained, with you as their co-pilot. Thursday nights at 7 p.m. Pacific, 10 p.m. Eastern, on the KCOR Digital Radio Network. For more information on Exploring the Bizarre and hosts Timothy Beckley and Tim Swartz, check out their KCOR Digital Radio Network page. Follow their YouTube channel at MRUFO 1100. Exploring the Bizarre.